Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate you being here tonight and sharing in the Normandy invasion. And as of this coming June, that will be the 70th year, 70th anniversary of the Normandy invasion. And I am not and have not been in the military. But for some reason, I've had this affinity to learn about World War II and the key leaders, and for 50 years I've been involved as a historian and learning about World War II, primarily in the European theater, but a lot in the Asiatic theater as well. And tonight I'm just delighted to be with you and share the story of the Normandy invasion with a little twist. Because it's not going to be just about the soldiers. It's going to be about the deception plans. It's going to be about the bravery. It's going to be about the spies. And it's going to be about some of the behind-the-scene information that allowed the Normandy invasion to be successful. So with that, let me take you on a journey with me back to June of 1944. On June 5 of 1944, this is the way Europe looked. And if you can see it, this green and this little piece down here, as well as Sicily, Sardinia, and over here in Corsica, they were all at that point under the control of the Allies. Great Britain, a few islands, southern Rome, and the Soviets had been moving towards the west, okay? Now, everybody thinks that Normandy was the first invasion of Europe, and actually, it was the second. Because the first invasion came through southern Italy. And on June 5, Mark Clark and the 7th Army paraded through the downtown streets of Rome, thinking that that would be a great celebration, but getting kind of second fiddle to what was going to take place at Normandy. Okay? So that's the time frame. Europe, and particularly Normandy and the French, had been under the occupation of the Germans since mid to late 1940. So for 4 years, they had been under German rule. And that's the picture that was on June 5, 1944. An evening of June 5, Eisenhower writes this letter and says, "We're going." And that was after a great deal of consideration to the weather and a whole lot of other things that were taking place, because he had already delayed it one time. And the invasion is a go, and on the midnight, he sent the 86th and the 102nd Airborne into France, into Normandy, to be the frontal guard of the invasion. And he sent one group into the west to protect the canals and the rivers, to the east, excuse me, and he sent the other one to protect the Cotentin Peninsula, which was the area where the Germans had all of their people at the port of Schaumburg, I think it was. Here's what the Atlantic Wall looked like in 1944. A guy by the name of Rommel, everybody knows that name, the Desert Fox. General Rommel was asked to protect the Atlantic Wall and create from northern Norway protection from the invasion of the Allies. Knowing that the Allies were going to invade sometime, someplace, they had to protect the entire Atlantic Wall. And Rommel was the guy in charge. And he did a heck of a job, particularly at Omaha Beach and a few other places. The shortest distance from where all of the people, the Allies, were encamped in southern England was Calais. That was the shortest point to Europe. And it's in that whole process that I'm going to take you on a different kind of journey. The German commanders, von Rundstedt and Rommel. Von Rundstedt was the chief. Rommel worked for him, but was in charge of building the Atlantic Wall to to suppress any kind of invasion force. By the way, on June 5, the night of, the weather was so bad, the meteorologist for the Germans said, there's no way in hell anybody's coming in at this point in time. So Rommel leaves Normandy, and he leaves his headquarters and his people at La Roche-Guyon, and he heads back to Germany, stops in Paris, buys a red pair of shoes for his wife to present to her on her birthday, June 6, 1944, the day of the invasion. So the field commanders, the top field commanders, weren't even there at the invasion site because of their miscalculation on the weather. Adolf Hitler was back in Berchtesgaden, Germany. This was his headquarters in Upper Bavaria. And this is where he grew up, basically, and was his power base, right next to Salzburg, Austria, and Munich. And so he was there, and on the invasion day, he was asleep. And they awakened him at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he says, no, that's not the invasion, it's somewhere else. That's a diversion at Normandy. And because he had total control of the 15th Army, which was near Calais, he wouldn't allow the 100,000 plus German tanks and soldiers to move down to Normandy because he believed that Normandy was a diversion. So, the question in conflict between von Rundstedt and Rommel was the following. Von Rundstedt knew that there was going to be invasion. They all did. The question was where and when. Von Rundstedt wanted to keep all of his people behind the wall. And whenever they found out where the invasion really was going to take place, he would then move and focus all of his military towards that point and try to push the Allies back into the ocean. Rommel had a different theory. He wanted to put them at key places right at the beach. He didn't want anybody getting off the boats. And his other argument was, if you're back here and you have to move here in the next few days after the invasion, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, was so weak, had no planes basically, and the Allies ruled the air, the Allies would wipe them out before they got to the beach, which is exactly what happened and how Rommel was injured moving from La Roche-Guyon back to the beach at one point. So there was this conflict in strategy, and then the final authority on the Panzer movement in the 15th Army was left to a field commander who was about 1,000 miles away to try and tell the people in the field what they should be doing. Key commanders for the Allies. Eisenhower became supreme commander of all forces. The first time America really became an international country by having to deal with the French, the Canadians, the Brits, and everyone else, and it was our leadership that was to pull all of that together. You had Montgomery was going to lead the forces in 3 of the beaches. You had Bradley going to be in charge of Utah and Omaha Beach. And you had George Patton, the general that was most feared by the Germans, used as a decoy. Pretty smart. And where do you hear what happens here? Okay? Now, Patton is being used as a decoy because he had made so many enemies while he was in Sicily, even after he won the battle in Sicily. He slapped 2 guys across the face with his glove and he was going to shoot one of them, and with American soldiers. And they were all battle weary. They were all shell-shocked. They were all in shock. And he didn't understand it. He thought they were cowards. He wanted to get them out of the infirmary. He was going to shoot them as a coward. Well, that word got back to Eisenhower, got word back to the United States. They wanted to send him back to the United States. And it was Eisenhower who stepped in with Marshall and said, no, I'm going to use them another way. So they used them as a decoy. Whoops. Military requisites for assaulting a beach is that you have to have a plan, You have to have the objective, which was Normandy, and the name was given was Overlord. You have to have intelligence so that you know more than the enemy, hopefully. The lodgements were going to be on the beaches, and these were the 5 beaches. Juno's Gold and Sword would be managed by Montgomery, and these 2 would be managed by Bradley. The game plan was in 2 weeks or 3 weeks to have Patton break out in the underbelly of Normandy to the open area all the way through past Paris, all the way to the Rhine River. But it didn't work so well because the Germans put up a fight, and Montgomery could not clear the city of Caen until 33 days when he was supposed to clear it in 3 days. And that caused a lot of confusion in the Normandy area. But this was the overall strategy. Churchill, the warlord, finally became prime minister in May of 1940. And he had been a leader in war in 1917, but was in the desert, was not in good stead with the British people until 1930, when he started talking about the buildup in Germany for 10 years, and he was called a warmonger, blah, blah, blah. But when time came that they needed a wartime president or leader, they called on Churchill. And he was a deceptive old turkey, okay? And he had as his fundamental belief that in wartime, truth is so precious, you got to protect it with a bodyguard of lies. In other words, you don't want your enemy to know the truth. You want them always to be guessing about what's true and what isn't true. And he did that through deception. And the British were very, very good at this. They had a long history, but they were very, very good. And so they developed a deception plan called Fortitude. In addition, there was the code breaking that took place that nobody knew except for a few people, and Churchill was one of them. And they called this the ultra secret because the Brits had broken the Enigma code of the Germans. In January of 1940, they started breaking the German codes. And by 1944 at Normandy, on D-Day, it was said that if the German field officers wanted to know what their game plan was, what their field operation was supposed to be, it would have been smarter to call Bletchley Park, where they had broken the code, than wait for their orders from Germany because they were already known. Okay? And then the last thing was the human and physical element of the invasion. Whoops. The Double Cross Committee, XX, 20 members of the committee, but called Double Cross. You notice in there it was directed by Winston Churchill himself. He got this Scotsman to build this committee together, and they had more deceptive plans and more creative ways in which they were going to get on that beach, and so many ingenious things. But the deception plan called Bodyguard had one objective: to convince Hitler that the invasion was at Calais, not Normandy. And in this deception plan, there were 5 concepts of trying to divert the Germans away from Normandy through these various names, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. Now, in order to deceive, the British, to their credit, from the beginning of the war, had rounded up all of the German spies and had them as double agents from the beginning of the war to the end of the war. And they were given very simple objectives. You're going to do as we say, or we're going to kill you right now. Okay? It's that simple. So they became very good double agents. Now, not all of these were double agents, but a number of them were. This is a bad map, but it's the best I can do for what I have in mind here. Bodyguard said the following. At Fortitude North, which was one of the concepts, they wanted to let the Germans know that they were going to invade in Norway. And in Norway, where they had built this wall and defense mechanism, they wanted to convince the Germans that Norway would be invaded from Scotland over to Norway, and the Allies would come through Norway and down through Europe. Fortitude South was designed to tell the Germans that the invasion was going to be at Calais. the shortest distance, the most logical place for the invasion.
How do they do this? How do they...
I'm going to help you. I'll get with you. That's all right. That's okay. The next thing was Ironside, which was another deceptive plan to come in the southern part of France in the open Bordeaux region. The next two were down here in southern France to come up through the southern part of France. So just, if you think about it, the whole idea was, how do we get the Germans to dissipate, thin out their armies, and stretch them so thin that where we enter, we have always a weak spot. So this game plan was basically, how do we deceive the enemy? Well, here's one way. Fortitude North, which would be the invasion in Norway. They had a triple agent named Brutus. And through his communication with the Germans in Berlin and in Spain and Portugal, he was able to convince them that the invasion was going to be in Normandy, and the Germans had to put an army in Norway. They had to put an army up there to protect that part of the wall in case they were coming through there. So that was one piece of the German army that they couldn't put in Calais or Normandy. Patton was used as a decoy. And he was set up in a little town, and I'll show it to you on the map, which is right near Dover, with what was identified as the 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSOG. And it was purported through all of these double agents and through a host of different mechanisms to convince the Germans that at FUSOG, with Patton, they had over 100,000 men and equipment that was going to be the invasion site into Calais, because it's inconceivable that nobody would have led the invasion to Europe without Patton. They had thousands of plastic tanks, rubber tanks. They had thousands of rubber trucks. And every night, they would get over there and pick them up and turn them around and put them in different places in order for an aircraft to take a picture of and to see that there was movement. They had electronic communications going 24/7 to make it look like there was a lot of conversations going on. And they would have pictures of Patton out there with his white silver gun, and he would be, being taken pictures of and put in London papers and so forth. The concept was to convince the Germans that Calais was part of the invasion force. That was part of Fortitude South. They even had their own insignias. There was only one person in FUSOG. That was Patton. Garbo, one of the most incredible people in the Second World War. If you ever have an interest in this, get the book, Garbo, The Spy Who Saved D-Day. This is one of the most incredible stories of deception that the British could put together with this guy's help. He was a Spanish guy, and he wanted to join the Allies to start with, and the Brits refused him. And then he did so many things to screw up the Germans on his own that the Brits says, we got to bring this guy in. He's pretty good, okay? So they brought him into the spy network. Now, he was so convincing that he created, over 3 years, an entire network of people that he conveyed back to Germany who were his spies to get a picture of what was really happening. Troop movements, various conversations of various departments in Britain, the movement of people during the potential invasion time. And he created this entire network of people, and he also had one killed because he notified the Germans this guy was getting too close to the truth, and I have to get him killed, I have to wipe him out. And so they even put an obituary in the London Times about this guy dying. None of these people existed. None of these people existed. Total 100% fabrication. But he convinced the Germans. You know how we know that he was so successful? Remember, it's June 6, 1944? By about August, he reports, and he gave all the Germans information about Normandy. He says, no, 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 it's going to be Calais, this is the diversion, blah, blah, blah. And by August of 1944, he notifies German headquarters and says the following: look, I've gone as far as I can go. You guys have given me about $500,000 to support me during this war. That's what he did. They gave him money. And he said, but I'm getting so close to the British intelligence that my system is going to be broken down anytime soon. And so I'm going to shut down my operation, and I appreciate all the things you've done for me. The Germans gave him the Iron Cross for his work. They gave him the Iron Cross. They didn't even know about it until the war was over many years later that they were so deceived. Okay? But Garbo became one of the most important people in the deception plan of Normandy. I think I'm going the wrong way. I apologize. Another one of the agents is a guy by the name of Tricycle. That was his name, Agent Tricycle. This guy was a playboy, and he had started the war back in Portugal and in Spain, and had made a lot of contacts with the Abwehr, which is the German intelligence and German army. And he had a connection with them, but he really was a terrific agent, and he convinced them that Pas de Calais was the invasion site. So you had Garbo, you had Tricycle, two people that they really bought into, telling that it was Calais. And then, as with any war, you got these peculiar things that happen. Here was a German agent that they decided to bring over and defect to British, but she said, I'm only going to defect from Portugal, I think it was, or Spain, I'm not sure which, to England, if you allow my dog to come with me. Babs, there's Babs right there. I don't know what the Allies did to the dog, either dropped him out of a plane or did something to him, but the dog never got to Great Britain. Okay? And she got so upset over it that she almost turned the tide and went back to the Germans. And the Brits knew about it. And if she had made one more step, she would have been eliminated, because they knew what was going to happen. So she was really, she almost became a casualty of the whole thing. So here's what happens with Bodyguard and the results of Bodyguard with Garbo, Tricycle, Bruce, and Fusel. They convinced the German command that Patton was going to invade with Fusel with over 100,000 men, 5 airborne division, 10 infantry division. Normandy was a diversion, Calais was a real invasion target, and it resulted in the following. The German 15th Army, with its tanks and infantry of over 20,000 people and 15,000 vehicles or whatever it was held at Calais until June 9. That's 3 days later. The reserves were diverted to Calais, not to Normandy, from the back. They were so convinced that Calais was still the site that they kept pushing all of the resources towards Calais and not Normandy. Now, on June 9, Hitler would not release the 15th Army to Normandy as both von Rundstedt wanted and as Rommel wanted. Von Rundstedt was then relieved of his duties, and a guy named Commander Klug came in. And that's another story. But how did the Allies know this? That's the next story. Bletchley Park. Bletchley Park is a little city 90 miles north of London, northwest. And right at the beginning of the war, they were looking, the MI6 intelligence people and decoders and decipherers were looking for a place to house their operation, knowing London was going to be under attack. So they found this little place in Bletchley Park, which was a little park area with a mini Meadowbrook mansion on it with a lake and just a beautiful setting. I mean, you just wouldn't believe. And what they did is they built a train spur from Bletchley to Oxford and Bletchley to Cambridge. And the reason they did that is they needed the resources, the human resources of linguists, of engineers, computer people, mathematicians, physicists, all type of chess masters. They needed them from the two great universities to come in every day and work on deciphering the German codes. They broke that code on January 1940. And from 40 to 45, till the war ended, they had broken all of the German codes at that point. Now, just before the war broke out, 3 Polish guys, mathematicians, trying to help Poland, knowing a war was going to break out, was able to steal one of the Enigma machines. From them, it went to the French, and from the French, the Brits. They put it at Bletchley. They used it there to try and figure out the codes, and that's how the British got it. And these guys were honored, and they have a memorial for the Polish people there at Bletchley. Here's the guy behind the machine. The story behind Turing is quite interesting too, because he was a genius, mathematical genius. And some of his works and theories and principles, particularly with computers, are still being used today. He designed, through the people there, with his help, the first known computer known to man in 1941, I think it was, when they built the bomb. And they were able to break the code. The bottom line was, this is the cottage area where he lived, and he broke the first code. A few weeks later, the German Air Force key known was broken, and the quarantine and the breaking of the Enigma was absolutely secret for the next 45 years. We did not know about Bletchley or the Enigma secret, the breaking of the codes, until 1987. The code breaking process, not going to go through it. It's the detail of how it all worked. But between 42 and 45, 12,000 people worked there daily. And not one of them knew what the guy or gal next to them was doing. When the war was over, there were only 3 or 4 people at Bletchley that knew what was happening. And the whole concept behind that was that they refused. That's just the whole process again. And these are the various different huts where they were able to break the various codes. Whoops, sorry. Here we go. These are the various huts, and that's the first computer. But they weren't allowed to tell anybody about what they were doing for 50 years. And they had to sign that when they left in August of 1945. So nobody knew what was there, and the people didn't even know what was going on there until 1988, when they decided they were going to tear down that mansion and they were going to build condominiums. And somehow the British government released some information, and from that to today, it is now a museum that's well funded and will be around for a long time as a result of what it's done. This was the message, and this was the results of what they were able to break through Enigma and through some of the other places. But here's the point that was made earlier. How did the Allies know 3 days after the invasion started that the Germans were going to not move the 15th Army? They intercepted the code from Hitler's headquarters that said that he's convinced Normandy is just a diversion, Pas-de-Calais will be the real invasion site, and he kept the 15th Army there for almost 30 days. So, the invasion is a go. So now we're going to the beach where the people and the equipment go. Well, this is just a military map that basically said in Wales and southern England, this is where all of the forces gained traction and got together and prepared themselves for the invasion. And it was right up about in here is where Patton was with his fake army, okay? Right near Calais. They wanted him to see. They wanted the Germans to see him. But what they did then is they came down and they met here, and then they came down to Normandy, and these were the 5 beaches: Sword, Juno, Gold, Omaha, Utah. And they invaded from the north straight down into the 61 mile beach area called Normandy. Here's another map of that. And you can see the various names again. And you can see the little towns along here that you've probably heard of: Ermonche, Colville, Vireville, Pointe du Hoc, Saint-Mary-Glace, and the Pegasus Bridge. Now, I shared with you earlier that at midnight Eisenhower had the 82nd and the 86th and the 102 jump in. The British jumped in here to Pegasus and were highly successful. In fact, it was 15 minutes and they had wiped out the German group that was protecting the bridge. And the important thing here was there's a canal and there's the river. And what they wanted to do was to protect against this side of Germans coming in to support a push of the Allies back into the water. So they built up a group of people here for the initial day until these people could come in with larger groups to protect this side. Very successful. In fact, it was described as being the greatest Air Force maneuvering in the history of the war, because gliders were picked up over London and driven and then let go, and they landed within 50 meters of the bridge at night with clouds. And the fact that it didn't wipe them all out and they were able to take the German garrison within 15 minutes was a miracle, just a miracle. Opposite results, total disaster. St. Mary Glace, the Americans dropped in there. They had a couple things go wrong. The clouds came up, the drop zone was totally screwed up. Most of the men were dropped behind the lines. Many, and I don't know the exact number, but hundreds were killed by drowning, because a lot of the area was flooded by Rommel as part of his defense mechanism. And a lot of them were killed with what they called asparagus. And those were long sticks with high points, so that when they came down, they were impaled into these very pointed pieces of equipment. But even more than that, for some reason, there was a fire in this little town called St. Mary Glace. And it lit up the sky. So when the paratroopers were coming down, the Germans had open shot at them and killed most of them coming down St. Mary Glace. So the drop in this area was a total disaster. But again, they had a lot of tricks up their sleeve. They dropped these dummy parachutes all over here and all over here. When they landed on the ground, they started shooting bullets, or at least it sounded like bullets, firecrackers, as if there was 1,000 of these people. In fact, there weren't. And it confused the Germans for hours until they tried to figure out what happened, until they were able to gather them and say, what is this? What's going on here? Simultaneously, at Calais, they sent over more, that night, they sent over more planes and dropped more bombs, and even created a unique feature by dropping out aluminum in the area so that radar would pick up the aluminum blips as if there were more planes than that, to try and create the emphasis that Calais is the area of concern, not Normandy. Battle of Normandy begins, Pegasus on the west. That was the glider that came in. 50 meters from the bridge they landed. They even have a memorial there, right near that bridge in place. That was the Pegasus. This was the last survivor in March of 2009. Pictures of D-Day. I only show a few here because it was a really, really difficult time. And the most difficult time was, of course, at Omaha Beach, which was called Bloody Omaha. And I've walked the beach 3 times. And what I can tell you is that they still have the entrenchments and the gun turrets that the Germans left there. And if you can imagine this beach, and up high, you have machine guns and big guns crisscrossing on the beach. And it was the most fortified area of the whole Normandy invasion that Rommel thought might be a place where they would come in. And the Germans in their writing said that we didn't even have to aim. All we had to do was just put in the direction, and we were wiping out people like crazy. And remember now, the Allies had to come across sand that was at least 200 yards, because they came in on low tide. And they were so stuck at Omaha for so many hours that day that high tide was in and pushing them right up against the wall, which almost drowned people. And that's when the real leadership took over and says, look, we're going to die on the beach. Let's go forward and die, and let's get in there. That's when things started really to work. Over the next 7 weeks, other important battles. Probably the biggest battle and the greatest difficulty the Allies had was what is called the bocage, the hedgerow country. It was an area right off the beaches that was never thought about as far as a defense. But what had happened is the French blocked off parcels of land by raising the ground up and putting these big trees around them. So it made for this great defensive position for the Germans. And with a couple guns and a couple soldiers, they could hold off large numbers of Allies trying to come through there. And the tanks didn't know how to maneuver up and over them. And I mean, it just took them a while to break through this. But then there were these other battles that took place. And it didn't break. It didn't break until July. And then in July, what had happened is Patton was then recommissioned, and he was able to move on into France. Facts about Normandy. 175,000 on the first day were landed there. 50,000 vehicles, 6,500 landing crafts. On D-Day +1, they had built a harbor. Let me tell you about this thing. How are we doing? We're going okay. Let me tell you. They built this harbor. Who do you think built the harbor? Who do you think came up with the idea? Churchill. He had his people build a 1-mile harbor in the Thames River in London at nighttime under the bridges, and they took over this entire bridge in pieces and put together once they got on the beach. And what it did, it went out about a half a mile to a mile so that the tankers and the equipment could come in over that bridge, because it was very low tide there, very low. So you had to get all the equipment on shore. And it was a deception plan because the Germans never thought that that was even possible. And there were 2 bridges made. The first one was destroyed at Omaha Beach because of a storm that came up. But the second one, Aeromarche, was so effective that it brought in all the equipment for months. The other thing the Brits did is they built an underground pipe. I mean, you're going to fight a war. You have to have gasoline, you have to have food, and you have to have munitions and equipment. Well, you get them over the bridge, and you better have gasoline waiting for them, okay? And what they did is they had an underground pipe. They piped it 1 million gallons a day. Now, in the end, the Allies almost outstripped their distance between the gasoline and the enemy in Berlin, and there was a problem there, but they finally overcame that one, but there was a problem. By June 11th, 5 days, that's what was brought on board to the beaches of Normandy. And by July 4, we had landed 1 million men, which is 1 month away. D-Day fatalities, you can see the numbers. Overall fatalities in the Battle of Normandy from June 6 to 25 is roughly 500,000 people that died. Those would be civilians, Germans, Allies. And the result of that getting on shore and getting a foothold in Europe doomed Hitler's fortress. The major breakout was in July. That's when Patton took over. By August of 25, Paris was liberated. The Battle of the Bulge took place, which was a German offensive that was unexpected. And Enigma never caught that one because Hitler refused to tell anybody except 3 or 4 people what he was doing. And there wasn't any communication because he was assuming that something was being detected by the Allies, and he wanted this one to be his last hurrah. It almost worked, but it didn't work. On the 7th, the Germans signed the papers, and the war ends on May 8th, 1945. I don't know how many of you have been to Normandy, but the American cemetery there at Colver-sur-Mer is one of the most heart-wrenching places to be.
We were there at sunset, and it's amazing.
Isn't it amazing? Yeah. 9387. The crosses and the stars of David are all facing west to the United States. And it is a very hallowed piece of ground. That's what it looks like from the air.
It's a lot of crosses.
Yes, it is.
Looks like a wheat field.
Yeah. Something that happened a month ago that I wanted to share with you. And that is on September 25. Two people, Jamie Wordley and Andy Moss, accompanied by numerous volunteers, took to the beaches of Normandy with rakes and stencils and etched 9,000 silhouettes into the sand. And they titled it The Fallen 9,000, okay, who were there at the cemetery. And it's right at Armonche, and here's what it looked like. That's a picture of just one of the beaches. Here's a picture of how they did it. Here's a picture of what it looked like up close. I get goosebumps looking at it. Here's another picture looking at the long beach. And here's another picture looking at it in the other direction.
It's like a bug trap that's been used over and over and over again without being cleaned out.
Yes, it is. Now, I'm going to offer a couple personal experiences with you, because I've been to Normandy 3 times. I've been to Bletchley 4 or 5 times. I don't remember how many times I've been there now. But in going to Bletchley, my wife and I found a book written by that lady, and we brought it back, and I started communicating with her. And a few years later, I met her in Oxford, and she drove us over to Bletchley and showed us the place she worked, how she did it, and she even decoded some messages for us while we were there. And we lost Doreen just a few years ago, and Michael and I, while we were there, we did a video of her doing all of her things, and they used that at her funeral. Her daughter and granddaughter are dear friends of ours, and we hosted her granddaughter here just about 6 months ago while she was in the States. There it is, the beach area. There's the church. And John Steele is the one who was hung on the church steeple. And when I was in London in 2009, there were a number of U.S. paratroopers that had just been to Normandy, and they were celebrating a reunion. They celebrated in London, and they had their hats on and everything. So I ran up to them and tried talking to them about where'd you land, what you do, where were you, and they shared all of that with me. It was a great experience for me, at least. And the one guy that I met with said his greatest fame during World War II is I was the guy that pushed out John Steele onto that church. Okay? He wanted to make that clear, okay? They didn't tell anybody because they believed in the principle at Bletchley that loose lips sink ships. That was their whole belief. And until 1987, nobody did. Nobody knew. And her greatest regret in that book that she wrote, her greatest regret was that she was never able to tell her mother and father what she did during the war. But she wanted to make sure her daughter and her grandkids knew what had happened. And it's not a New York Best Time reading, okay? But it is a story of her experience there. And it's an incredible story of 12,000 people who worked there, not knowing what they were doing except helping to win the war. They went back, and every year now, the Queen meets with them and pins new medals on them every year. And there's more stories behind that, but I won't share that with you. That's a 15,000-piece slate a picture of Turing that is in a memorial for him that's in the museum there. Quick story about Turing, just for a second. A genius, was gay. And in the 50s, in Britain, it was against the law to be gay.
Who's gay, baby?
I'll let your dad explain that to you, okay? And in the 50s, it was against the law. And in his debate and in his back and forth of whether he should announce that he's gay or not, and the policies of all, he took his own life. before anybody really understood the value of what this guy had done during the war. He never got the credit he was due. And there were others there who weren't gay, but who never got the credit until recent years. Now, I'd like to show you a quick video. Pat, you want to put it on? It's about an 8-minute video of a visit that my son and I made
You want
to,
to do that before you do the Bob Hope thing?
yes, yeah, before we went to, when we went to Normandy, okay?
It's Aaron's computer. Sound not working? You know what? Did I plug it in the wrong one?
There we go.
That's good stuff.
These mist-covered mountains are home
Is that when the guy got caught?
for me.
The one goes coast.
Yeah. They have a paratrooper hung there all the time now.
Oh, they do?
Real one?
No,
Someday you'll return.
that's my number 3 son.
Your valleys and your falls, and you'll no longer want to be brothers in arms.
This is the museum right in the city.
Through these fields of destruction, baptisms of
Some of it, yeah. There is more there.
I've witnessed your suffering as the battle raged hard,
All along the roads, they recognize people.
and lonely it was so bad. In the fear of your arms, you did not disturb me, my brothers and I. There's so many different worlds.
Most of the men landed in a place they weren't supposed to in Utah.
And we have just been but we live in different worlds.
And watch the next scene from that same spot. That's the way it looked.
Did you visit Point Du Pont?
Yeah, it's on here right next.
Pardon me?
It's on the next slide.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
Now the sun's gone to hell.
there it is.
There it is, yeah.
Let me bid you farewell. Every night has to die, but it's written in the stars.
That was the way the embankments were, and the big guns. That's the way it looks today. Same one. Look at the thickness of the concrete and everything in there. they left the land natural after it was bombed. Those are all bomb craters. Yeah. That's the only Medal of Honor winner there, Teddy Roosevelt, Jr.
Is that your son?
Yes, it is. Number 3 son. There's that Mulberry Bridge, parts of it. Well, that was another experience that we had personally at Omaha, and I can tell you in Normandy beaches, it's a very powerful scene, and if you get a chance to go, you ought to. How many have been there before? You were there, John, you were there, weren't you? Yeah, both of you? Both, okay. It's a very powerful scene, and when you hear the story behind it, and particularly the bravery and the ingenuity of the soldiers that took place there, and what they had to overcome. You know, when you come in from the sea, there's only one way to go. Going back into the sea is not a very good idea. So you got to make it work. And they used the deception and all the other things that were important to it. So there were a lot of heroes. And I hope you enjoyed a little bit of knowledge and history on Normandy and a few sentimental moments here that I think talks a lot about our country. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.